Our next speaker, Guy Morgan. Guy is the Managing Director of Global Operations Advisory Group Lead at BBK. He's got 30 years of experience in plant management and operational improvement with an emphasis on program launch, lean manufacturing, and management. Guy?
Good morning, everyone. First, hats off to Brian and Scott. I used to work in those factories, and I understand what you guys go through on a daily basis, and my hat's off to you. It isn't easy, and it's not getting easier. Just a few minutes on BBK and the wholly owned subsidiary of BBK, known as Performance Improvement LLC. This isn't a paid introduction. This is just to give you a feel for why I'm here and the kind of work that we do. We essentially, under a new brand, Performance Improvement LLC, provide a tremendous amount of service and advisory to Tier 1s and Tier 2s in auto and non-auto in making them better. I think if I ask you to raise your hands, many of you have heard of BBK before, and certainly we have an excellent reputation in financial restructuring. What we didn't have a lot of knowledge in the marketplace was our capabilities in turning factories around and enhancing supply chains. So that's what we do under the brand or moniker of Performance Improvement LLC. What I'm going to do is change this up a little bit today, and after the macro and technological activity that Scott and Brian gave you, I'm going to spend some time on two cases that are indicative of the kinds of people that can shut you down on a regular basis, and in fact do so. Not necessarily on a regular basis, but in fact do so. First, do we have anyone in the audience that's representing a Tier 2 supplier to the auto industry? That's what I thought. Very few. These folks have been through an awful lot lately, and an awful lot of our engagements at Performance Improvement and BBK have been at the smaller Tier 1 and at the Tier 2 levels. These are people that typically don't have the opportunity to gain the level of sophistication that you just saw in the previous two presentations. These are people that have been through a tremendous amount in volume shifts from a 17 million market down to a 9 million market, and we all experienced that in the last 5 years. So this morning I'm going to talk to you about two different companies. One's a casting company and the other one is a stamping company, and the kinds of things that they were going through and what we did to help them, and we're pretty pleased with what happened. We've been able to sustain the gains in PI LLC very well, and we're happy to help your supply chain as needed. So the first one is a die-cast company. I'm going to give you, you'll see some standard work here. I'm a lean zealot, so you shouldn't be surprised by standard work. This is a die-cast company, a supplier to the auto and non-auto. About 80% of their volume was auto, maybe 20% was non-auto. They've, like a lot of Tier 2s and some of the smaller Tier 1s, they've had several owners in the past 25 years. Not to mention the fact that they're also having people call private equity knock on their door, looking for opportunities through the investment banking world and private equity world. BBK does provide knowledge, and we do work with private equity folks on a regular basis. And there was some private equity involved with this. Non-disclosure agreements won't allow me to tell you how much, but I can tell you there was some impact of private equity here. So they had several owners in the last 25 years. They had this particular die-cast house had survived the recent downturn in the 2009 and 2010 period. I think a lot of you may not be aware of it, but if you want to take a look at two shrinking industries within the auto space, foundries and die-cast folks are probably, if not the two leaders, certainly up there. And there's nothing like walking into a die-cast house when it's 103 outside and 125 inside. Those are two-shirt kind of days, and believe me, we've been through a lot of them this summer. BBK had worked with some of these folks in the past. This particular die-cast house, again, it had several owners, and we had worked for previous owners, typically in the financial side. On the operations side, we had done some assessments that typically take 3 to 5 days, where we go in and through a production system mentality begin to evaluate the current state of the company as well as future state opportunities. Very simple mentality, a value stream map displaying Kaizen burst opportunities certainly are part of our methodology. This particular company came back strong with lots of volume and not much capital. For those of you that are from big companies that got lots of money, there are a lot of guys out there that didn't get all the TARP money that was advertised. They had to go to banks that weren't lending, and at the same time, they had to go from $9 million to $13 million in 16 months. Now, I can stand here and make a lot of excuses for these guys, but you'll see that in some respects, they were the victim of their own ignorance. When we went in, we were told that capacity was the red X. And for those of you that are Ellie Goldrat students like myself, you'll understand that Ellie used to say that a good portion of the capacity issues and constraint issues in factories are between the 2 ears of the management team. And that's certainly what we found here. Several existing clients had asked us about our knowledge of this company. It was particularly interesting because this particular purchasing executive said, you know, these guys needed volume for a long time. We gave them all kinds of volume. What could go wrong? That was somewhat naive, but that's something that we heard. So in going into this particular engagement, we were asked to take a look at protection of supply, improving throughput. They had a very bleak profit picture, and our financial guys supported that. And we were told, at least by the different parties, that the overall focus should be on quality, delivery, and cost. And we saw from our assessment that that was probably accurate, but not as accurate as they may have thought. So what'd we find when we got there? We found an extremely good workforce. If you're out in the middle of Iowa, and that's not where this was, but if you're out in the middle of Iowa, a good workforce is a terrific advantage. There are incredible amounts of die-cast houses and foundries out there that have lost their talent when the volume went down, that find themselves in an uphill battle to make ends meet. And when I say make ends meet, that again is in quality, delivery, and cost. We found a hardworking management team. They weren't the brightest. They certainly weren't the best. But again, they were hardworking. We found lack of capital, as an example. Things that you may, in your chairs out there, take for granted, spare parts, complex inventory cribs. They certainly don't have this when there's 300 people and they're doing $110 million in sales. That's not always the case. Those of you that are in purchasing, you may want to think about doing layered audits on some of these folks, because frankly, if they're struggling at 13 million, we can only imagine what it's going to be like if it gets to 15 million. Lastly, in this particular company, there was absolutely no evidence of a production system. Now, we've been talking production systems for about the last 20 years. Again, I'm a product of several different production systems. And the previous two speakers described elements of production systems quite capably. Fortunately for me, I was a part of the Toyota production system for 12 years. So what we did, once we established ourselves in this particular factory, was we played off the value stream map. Again, I think a lot of people say they understand value stream mapping, but in actuality, they're about 2 questions deep. When we went in and we queried the system, we found about 4 times as many Kaizen bursts as the previous management team. We were going to focus on uptime. We wanted to focus on no defect forward to enhance first time through. Rework in this factory was incredible. It was on typical days, any day that ends in a Y typically led to about 10% of sales was scrap or rework. And again, we wanted to focus on moving from the Excel spreadsheet scheduling to internal pulls. There are a lot of people out there right now selling software systems. We do simulate. We like it. We don't always do it. It depends on the case and the engagement. But one of the concerns that I have at the Tier 2 level in particular is if these folks are if they lack sophistication, how much money do you think they have to spend on an SAP system? The answer is not very much. So they're up against it, and right now you have an awful lot of people using Excel spreadsheets and that sort of thing. What we needed to do with these folks was focus on right part, right time, right quantity. No deviations. No deviations. And it's very difficult for people in a situation like this because they're human computers. They're not necessarily people that have all the luxuries of an advanced computer system. They're human computers, so they know what needs to run next, and it typically isn't always the right part, right time, right quantity, and as a result of that, they miss schedules, premium transportation goes up, and you guys know the drill. As we attacked these particular items, again, the focus on the uptime, we were able to take the particular factory from 39 to 60%. This was in a 12-week period. The big challenge on uptime essentially was a focus on operational effectiveness. We took this particular factory from 5 and 6 days and 7 days in certain areas to 4 10s. With the idea on the 4 10s, they had limited maintenance capabilities, and as a result of that, we went to 4 10-hour days with a 2-hour gap in between the 2 shifts to do maintenance and to do leveling of the schedule because certain aspects of that factory didn't lend themselves to the drum buffer rope of other areas of the factory. The focus on no defect forward, again, from a quality standpoint, just one comment on that. When you're in plastics factories and die-cast factories and those kinds of places where you can regrind and remelt your inventory, folks, that's bad. But people do it anyway. And then they tell you about how much material they're saving. And we see it on an ongoing basis. When a guy walks up to me in a factory and says, "Don't worry about the scrap guy, we'll remelt it." I said, okay, what about all the labor costs? What about all the operational costs? What about all the burden costs that go into you getting something to the end of the line so you can remelt it? Then there's this quiet, and they don't understand because they've been remelting and regrinding and remachining and reworking for the past 10, 15, 20 years. Schedule reliability on the first time through helped us significantly. Right part, right time, right quantity made them do 2 things. 1, focus on no defect forward, and 2, they absolutely needed to get serious about changeovers. A lot of these people don't like to do changeovers. They'd like to set something up and run it for 2 weeks. That's great until somebody else calls the president and says, where are you on 25,280,000? And then all hell breaks loose. So once we got them convinced that a changeover wasn't a bad idea and that it was an effective use of the material, and oh, by the way, the material that you receive from the foundry, you could receive it in smaller batches and in smaller lots. It's really the right thing to do. The light began to click. And the last item here that I want to comment on is that scrap as a percentage of sales went down significantly. Now, they got a long ways to go when it comes to scrap as a percentage of sales. But I think they're going to get there, and I feel pretty good about the progress that they've made, at least in the 12 weeks that we were there. So quickly, closing on the first case, the lessons learned: relentless pursuit of first-time through improvement created the mindset. I think, I can't remember whether it was Brian or Scott, but somebody put up the pillars of success, the pillars of quality, the pillars of a manufacturing system, whatever you'd like to call it. When we went into this particular factory, again, we saw great workers, we saw workers with great attitudes, and we needed to get them excited about first time through quality. No more remelt. No more passing a defect to the next internal customer. Stop the process. Understand the value of the capital. And it worked out pretty well. Don't deviate from the findings in the value stream mapping exercise. I don't know how many of you folks have been on value stream map walks, but the amazing thing about them to me is that when you get done and you go back into the conference room, people will actually sit down and discount a Kaizen burst. We don't have time to work on that. We'll do that a little later. All Kaizen bursts lead to a sufficiency plan, which is a list of initiatives for continuous improvement. It is extremely valuable. Right part, right time, right quantity was tough, but we got them through it with some single-minute exchange of die focus. We focused on quality, people, and throughput. And that was it. When the lawyers came in, when the bankers came in, when the private equity guys came in, I had very little to say to them. Our focus was relatively single-minded. We had to teach them that there was no difference between an internal and an external customer. And at the end of the day, although they didn't have any money for capital, capacity was enhanced without capital infusion. So this sort of tells you what the world is like as some of you sit here thinking, I hope you're thinking, man, I hope I've got die-cast houses in my supply chain that are better than what I just heard. Because you deserve better. At the same time, you've got a launch coming up, something that I don't miss much anymore, but you've got a launch coming up, and how capable are your Tier 2 die-casting folks? How ready are they for launch readiness? I don't want to be the first guy to tell you, but there are people out there that cheat on PPAP. Some of you are looking at your loafers right now, but there are people out there that do that. So again, how often do you provide layered audits of your supply chain? Okay, I'll move along here. The next is a stamping company. Again, similar format to what I walked through, and I hope you find it to be of value. The stamping company was a supplier of the auto industry. They were privately held. They barely survived the downturn. They actually started to do stamping for some other types of aerospace people to break even, generate cash flow. They came back strong in the past year. Again, high volume, capital constrained, and they had capacity issues. The Tier 1 contacted us and essentially said the stamping company was exhibiting poor delivery performance, about 80% on-time delivery. Again, some of these folks that we deal with, you wish you had stock in some of the logistics and air freight people, because there's an awful lot of money being spent on their way from 9 million to 13 million North American sales. BBK was engaged to improve throughput, enhance material flow, and again, install right part, right time, right quantity. What we found when we got there, folks, was a tired factory. This processes had not been improved at all in several years. There was no single-minute exchange of dies. There was no evidence of continuous improvement, and they certainly had capital issues. This was a very unsophisticated management team, and again, no evidence of a production system. Certainly, there was a SMED opportunity, a PM opportunity, and an OEE area that was lacking focus. So these are the kinds of things that we did after we did an assessment and had a long chat with the management team. And this was one that was fairly interesting because I actually ended up getting up and speaking in front of 400 workers on how they had to do things differently. Because their enemy, their competitor, wasn't necessarily in Southeast Asia or China. Their competitor was in Tennessee. And their competitor made the same kind of money that they made in wage and fringe. So we needed to get them into a different mindset. So to focus on the right part, right time, right quantity, we installed a run only to the schedule mentality. We wanted to limit the steel purchase to just in time. These folks, after they did a morning walk, discovered, as we had in the value stream map, that the cycle counts were off on a daily basis by a margin of about 10 to 11%. So bringing in less steel meant that there was less for them to run out of schedule. Less availability restricts the potential overrun. We provided training to the workforce in single-minute exchange of dies. The individual die change effort became a team concept. The job instructions that stood next to the press became standard work, and observations that were made on how the die should be changed more quickly was stimulated through the kind of simulation that you've heard earlier, as well as additional video technology. We developed a pull board focus, again, built only to the requirement, audit the process regularly, improve the PM process, and take the PM process from what they did, which was cycles and strokes, to day and a time element. This particular company needed to get to a time element as they limited their strokes. Otherwise, PM would have never have occurred. The results were pretty good. Uptime went up 15 percentage points from 45 to 60. Schedule performance went from 80% to 97%. And turns, I got a call this morning, turns are actually better than 42, but they went from 20 to 42 while we were there. So the lessons learned here. The company really didn't have an uptime problem as much as it did an execution problem. And we find this an awful lot at the lower tier ones and tier twos. The lack of sophistication, they charge off going into a direction that they may not really understand, that light at that end of that tunnel is a train. They're just simply not as sophisticated as the folks in this room may think they should be. Inventory turns went up with success in the SMED culture. We asked the company to make a commitment to training, which they did. We had to get suppliers and customers involved. And I'll just give you one short story here. We decided to have a VAVE, value analysis, value engineering exercise, and we literally had to introduce the release engineer from a tier one to the supplier. Now this is classic throwing the design over the cubicle wall, or in this particular case, the electronic wall. We emphasize plan, do, check, act. It's not enough to do things. It's more important to do them well and then to check on it. My Japanese friends used to tell me, Morgan-san, believe everyone and then follow up. And it's certainly our mantra. And standard work, again, provided all of the discipline that was necessary for us to be successful. So in summary, before I depart here, I would ask you all to take a look at your tier twos. Do they have an assessment process? Do you have an assessment process? A small die-cast item as big as my hand can shut down a car factory. And I don't know what it costs to shut down a car factory now, but I remember the days when it was $18,000 to $20,000 a minute. Am I close? Thanks. Don't assume that volume is the answer. Just because you give somebody a lot to drink doesn't mean that they're thirsty. And I think there's one other item that I'd like to leave with, and that's the opportunity to be successful. A lot of the people right now that are at 13 million aren't going to get to 15 million. And they're going to need that stimulation from folks like you to get there. They're not really ready to do 13 million, and they're getting there through overtime and other methods of premium. So it's a tremendous opportunity for those of you that are sitting in this room and those of you that are affiliated with supply chains. And certainly if you need any help, BBK is there to help you. Thank you.